So I grew up in Sonoma County, California, in the wine region of Northern California there, and lived in a town that went from one of these 100,000 people communities to suddenly ballooning to a 200,000 or 300,000 person community in just a few years because of the tech boom and all these other things that happened. And what happened is that I didn't like the suburbs, basically. I'm not a suburbs kind of guy. I like a sense of community. And so what happened is that I wanted to go away for school, and I went and looked at different places to go, and eventually found Cornell University. Loved the community of Ithaca. And so I decided to come over, and at the same time, my whole family decided to make that move too, with me, which is not very common, that a family goes across the country with their son. But what happened is that I have a little brother who's a special needs child, and so California, it used to have the best schools in the country, but then there was a tax cap called Proposition 13, and it severely lowered the amount of funding that schools had. And so basically the main way a school could have growth is by basically expanding the city, because you couldn't raise more taxes off the property tax, and so you had to actually push for growth and sprawl, right, as a result. My community, though, we didn't have enough money to do that, to grow, and so what ended up happening is the schools just got tougher and didn't improve over time. And one of the things that got sacrificed during that time period was the special education programs. And so my brother is a special needs child. He has intellectual disabilities, couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't be in the classroom with other kids when he was 8, 9 years old. So the family said, well, how's the schools in New York? And I said, well, the schools are pretty good, and we invest in special education here. And so my family decided to make the move all the way over to the East Coast, and that was 10 years ago. Yeah, Rick?
How did you, what was your major in college then?
Okay,
You're a hospital administrator now.
That's right. Yeah, I have an interesting journey. I mean, basically, I started out as a theater and art major. I liked screenplays, writing, direction, all that kind of stuff, more on the creative side. But this was during the 2002 time frame, and the war in Iraq was a big issue. And I thought that I had a lot of concerns about the war and the lead up to the war, and in addition to that too, I felt like it was a war that wasn't being funded. And Joe Biden talked about this yesterday. It was a war that was put on a credit card. And so I got interested in politics at that point. And then from there, I was a sociology major, graduated from Cornell, and ran for the county legislature from there. And I ran for the county board because I knew a lot of people in the community, and I had done a lot of work in the community on living wage issues, basically.
How old were you when you ran for legislature then?
How old was I?
Yeah.
I announced when I was 21, right? Yeah, so I got an early start. And I got a kind of reputation in the community because I was fighting for a living wage, but also what I was doing is that when there were employees that were having disputes with their employers, I would help and mediate through a group called the Workers Center, the Tompkins County Workers Center, and fight for the wages of those workers. And it was kind of a community union in a way, right, for those workers that didn't have a union to represent them. And so I got a good reputation through my work in the community, and so people encouraged me to run for the county legislature. And when I ran for the county legislature, my platform was all about doing the opposite of the kind of growth I saw in California. I wanted community-driven growth. I wanted it sustainable. I wanted a strong downtown community. And so I ran on that, and I also ran on trying to fight these high property tax increases that were happening year to year. Because I saw how in my own district there were senior citizens and people on fixed incomes that were selling their homes because their property taxes were going up so dramatically. And in 2003 and 2004, right before I decided to run, those were the years where the Governor Pataki shifted the Medicaid costs onto the counties. And I think almost every county saw anywhere between an 11 and 20% increase to their property taxes 2 years in a row because of that change. And so I knew that property taxes to me had become not just a tax issue, but it actually became kind of a social justice issue in a way for me, because I saw how it was hurting our senior citizens especially. So I ran on that, won the election, and from there I became interested in economic development, and so I served on the Facilities and Infrastructure Committee. I was on the airport board for about 4 years and was the vice chairman of the airport, where we actually brought new air service on and actually lowered our airplane fees so that we were competitive with even places like Syracuse, even though we were a little local airport. And then I started getting interested in healthcare, because what happened is that Governor Pataki at the time had this thing called the Berger Commission that he had proposed, and it was to shut down nursing homes and hospitals across New York State. And one of those nursing homes was Lakeside Nursing Home in my community. And if it shut down, it would have meant that 100 Medicaid patients would have had to go about 25 miles away to the nearest facility. And so I created a working group with State Assemblywoman Barbara Lifton, and we fought the governor on this, and we were able to keep this nursing home open. Now, we did have to find ways to restructure the nursing home to keep it going financially, and we did that as well, so that it still could work in the long term, and it's still open to this day. And so I got interested in healthcare issues from there and decided to get a master's in health administration, because I realized that healthcare was the biggest issue of our time. The fact that at that point, it was already 15% of our GDP spending was in healthcare. And I had concerns that the healthcare system that we have right now is one that basically is focused on volume rather than quality. And that's not good for patients, and it's not good for healthcare costs either. It means that healthcare costs go up. And so I wanted to become an expert on healthcare. And so I went to Cornell and got a master's in health administration. And while I was there, instead of working, I was a legislative aide for the state assemblywoman for those 2 years when I was in grad school. And I was her constituent services guy that helped people get health insurance, fight insurance denials. I also work on transportation issues as well. But what happened is that after I graduated from my master's in health administration, I decided that I wanted to work on the ground in healthcare. Because I feel that a lot of times you have people that are policymakers that are very good at writing policy, but they're not very good at execution. And execution is huge. In other words, how you implement the policy. So if I wanted to truly become an expert on healthcare, I needed to be on the ground on healthcare decision making. And so I applied for a job at Guthrie Healthcare System, and they gave me a job in the Clinical Regulatory Compliance Department. Now that is basically as boring as it sounds. It's basically the department where the Joint Commission, which is the agency that accredits all hospitals, it was the department that was in charge of making sure that we could be accredited year to year. And if you lose your accreditation, basically it means your hospital's sunk because you lose all your Medicare and Medicaid dollars. And so I became a regulation expert on healthcare, specifically in the areas of environment of care and life safety issues, emergency preparedness, as well as food and nutrition programs as well. And it just so happened that the administrative director that was in charge of all of those areas went on to become a vice president in another hospital. And so that job opened up, and because I had a good relationship with the employees, the management, and I knew the laws and regulations, they offered me the position. And so I went from having no departments at all and no employees that I was supervising to suddenly being in charge of 200 employees, 10 departments for the hospital. And a couple years later, they actually made me in charge of materials management for the hospital too. And that's the department that does all the purchasing, and we're also the department that does all of the negotiating when we're buying devices and medical devices and goods from big companies. And so got a lot of negotiation experience from that as well. And so that's how I got into healthcare. And I decided to do this run in part because of that healthcare experience. What happened is that I was in charge of emergency operations, and I was the person that had to write the plans in the case of a natural disaster, a tornado, a flood, an earthquake. What we would do. So I wrote those plans with my chief safety officer, and I never thought that I would actually have to implement these plans. Right? I wrote the plans, we prepared for it, got all the emergency equipment and the facilities that we needed in case of a disaster. But never did I think that I would actually have to use it as soon as I started writing those plans. And what happened is that Tropical Storm Lee hit last September. And that was the storm that devastated Owego, Binghamton, also Athens, Pennsylvania. And if you look at exactly where that storm hit, Guthrie's service area, we were right in the middle of it. And so what happened is that I was made almost, not by accident, but by, it was just due to a number of circumstances, I became suddenly the incident commander of the hospital. I was the highest ranked person that knew the most about the emergency operations, and so I was put in charge. And I was in charge of the hospital for those 3 days of the flood. I had a full house of patients, 238 patients. There was a nursing home that got flooded out. We had to evacuate them into our hospital. It was incredibly terrifying experience. We lost our sewage system too, which when you lose a sewage system in a hospital, it's pretty tough. But luckily, there's rules and regulations that say you have to have 72 hours of fresh water too. And so we did. And so we were able to keep going. But after the floods, my own employees, they didn't have a home. Because many of them, there were 10,000 homes that were damaged or destroyed in the area. And so I was expecting some more help from the federal government, especially from FEMA, to help out these communities. But unfortunately, what had happened is that Congressman Reed at that time was one of many members of Congress that wanted to see offsets somewhere else in the federal government before they would vote for increases in spending in the federal government, which theoretically sounds nice, but I think that when it came to FEMA funding, it was a disastrous mistake. And so what happened is that he voted against extending those FEMA funds at that time, and the community was really shocked by it. I was shocked by it because this is his own backyard. These are the people that he represents, or many of them were, and this was happening. And so that was a real moment for me where I realized that I wanted to actually challenge Congressman Reed, and for that issue, but then for many others. And I can get into those during Q&A here too. And so I decided to announce back in March my candidacy for this. And from there, it was a real, it's been ever since just a real grassroots campaign. I went and made phone calls and did meetings with every mayor across the southern tier, learned about the issues from them, and I think I was able to get a lot of support in the primary because I knew what these mayors were going through with high property taxes, with trying to keep these struggling communities going. Because even though I'm a county legislator in Ithaca, I'm a hospital administrator in the southern tier in Bradford County, Pennsylvania, but also our service area is basically Tioga County, Chemung County, Steuben County. And so I knew what the southern tier was going through. And so I decided to just do this grassroots campaign, reached out to folks, and before I knew it, I had the support of all the Democratic mayors before the primary and won the primary decisively, and now we're in this race against Congressman Reed.
What are the issues that you're finding along the way as you travel? Do they change from the northern part of the district down to over here in the western part?
So this district, you guys know this, it's basically the Finger Lakes, but then it's Tioga County, Chemung, Steuben, Allegheny, Cattaraugus, Chautauqua County, so all the southwestern, southern tier counties. And what's interesting is that definitely the top two issues, without a doubt, are jobs and healthcare. And so jobs comes in a lot of interesting ways. You see the loss of manufacturing jobs, one with Dale Tile recently, also with Sikorsky in the Big Flats area. And these job losses have only exacerbated the job problem throughout this area where manufacturing jobs have been lost. And manufacturing is really, I believe, the backbone of the whole southern tier. And we've seen those manufacturing jobs go. And I think it's become a top issue to fight for those manufacturing jobs. So it's not just about jobs, it's getting these manufacturing jobs, these middle-class jobs, at least saving them from going, but then also finding ways to expand them. So that's why I've talked about very specifically, right, eliminating the deductions that companies get for sending jobs overseas. Right now, a company can deduct the expenses of opening up a factory in China, which is to me absolutely crazy. And so I would eliminate those deductions. That's something that Senator Gillibrand and Senator Schumer are talking about. They have a bill that does that. I think it's called the Bringing Jobs Back Home Act or something to that extent. And it would actually eliminate those deductions, and at the same time, to incentivize jobs coming back, would give a credit to every job that a company brought back from overseas to the United States. So I think that's a good policy. The second thing that I want us to do is that I want us to look at these trade policies that we have. NAFTA was an agreement that happened in the 90s that I believe there's a Fiscal Policy Institute and a few other places have reported that at least 680,000 jobs in the United States were lost due to the NAFTA agreement. Our trade deficit also got even larger, which I believe is a big part of the reason why we have so much debt in this country right now, is because of this huge trade deficit. And so what I would like us to do is have agreements. I'm not against trade. I think trade is great. Trade is a great way for us to expand our diplomatic and economic influence throughout the world and develop real relationships with people. But I only want trade that's fair for American workers. So that means that if we're going to go into a country and start trading with them, that we ask that they elevate their labor standards, have environmental standards. And we've done this with some countries, with some agreements, but not all of them. And actually do that so that way we're playing as much on a level playing field as possible. Because I believe that American manufacturing, if we're playing on a level playing field, right, we actually do succeed. We are more productive than anybody else out there. We can do it with low labor costs as well, if you compare it to our productivity. And so I think that there's better opportunities with these trade agreements. And if you look at Congressman Reed, he's supports free trade, complete free trade. And I think that that's a mistake, and we've seen already that type of decision making and the devastation that it's caused in our communities across this area. And so also with jobs, though, it's not just about the trade, and it's not just about bringing jobs back from overseas. It's also about training the employees that we need here. Because, Dresser Rand just had a jobs fair, right? And they need quality people in order to fill those positions. And if you look over Chautauqua County, there's the Southern Tier, the Manufacturers Association, right? They decided to bring their manufacturers together with JCC to basically create a program to train highly skilled labor to work in manufacturing. So there is a need to train good quality people. And I think that what we need to do is look at our education policy in the United States and look at the German model. Like in Germany, they actually train students how to be machinists, how to be software engineers at a very young age, right? People can choose that path at the age of 16 years old. And that way, by the time they're 25, they are incredibly skilled labor. And it's cheaper for companies, and this is what happens in Germany, is that corporations have been moving their manufacturing to Germany because they don't have to have the expense of training an employee for years to be that highly skilled and experienced. And so I think we need to apply that same kind of philosophy and concept here in the United States. So that's jobs. The second thing is healthcare. And healthcare takes a lot of different forms. First, for senior citizens, it's concerned about the future of the Medicare program. And unfortunately, both sides are doing a lot to scare people about what will happen with the future of Medicare. But the thing about the Medicare program right now is that it is in need of reform, and it's also in need of actually getting help to stay in existence for the long run. I am not in favor of these privatization schemes. I'm not in favor of voucher programs because what I believe it will do is it threatens the very nature of the Medicare programs and actually doesn't do anything to really make it solvent for the long run. What I'd like to do is I'd like to see Medicare actually be more money to go into the Medicare program and actually to strengthen it for the long term. And I can get into that exactly during Q&A. Because, and actually, no, I'll just do it really quickly right now. Basically, with healthcare right now, whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, or just the way we spend money on healthcare right now, the problem is that the system itself, and Obamacare didn't work on this, right? Nor does any Republican proposal actually talk about this either. The problem right now is that we have a system that's very much based on volume and quantity, rather than based on quality. So the Affordable Care Act, it didn't do enough reforms in that front. It talked about it. It does propose test projects, which I think are a good first step, to move away from this quantity-based system to a quality-based system. So what does that look like? Well, right now we have a fee-for-service model. So a doctor basically gets paid based on how many patients they see, how many expensive tests that they order, how many expensive surgeries that they do. And so where are the incentives then? Well, the incentives are basically with doing more, but not necessarily doing it better. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like us to see us move from that fee-for-service model to a quality-based model. And one of those things right now are accountable care organizations. And what they do is that it incentivizes a continuum of care. So that means that primary care doctors are working together with specialists who are working with rehab facilities and working with long-term care facilities, often under an integrated delivery system model. And then what happens is that these systems are paid a specific amount of money to take care of a population of patients. And what this does is it moves the incentives to having high quality care because then what happens is that they don't want to do they won't have to do the expensive surgeries because they're focusing on catching diseases very early on through prevention and intervention. And so that's the kind of reforms that I would like to see, and that would keep Medicare strong into the long run, but would also lower our healthcare costs in general. But overall with healthcare too, it's not just the Medicare program that we need to fight for, it's also the future of the Medicaid program. And by the way, I can talk specifically about Congressman Reed's latest assertion that the Affordable Care Act is going to increase Medicaid costs for counties. That's actually not true because I'm a county legislator and I know this. There was a cap in 2006 that was implemented by Governor Pataki that actually caps the amount of money that Medicaid costs can go up in counties. And that was as a result of his earlier decision in 2003 to shift Medicaid costs. So what Congressman Reed was talking about is not accurate. But Medicaid is still an issue, and part of the problem with the Medicaid program right now is that instead of it just being a healthcare program, it's a long-term care program. So about 50 to 54% of the Medicaid costs in New York State is actually long-term care. And you probably have family and friends that you know, right, who have had parents or grandparents that spent down all their assets because they were in a nursing home. And then in order to stay in the nursing home, they had to rely on Medicaid in order to stay in those facilities, right? And so Medicaid has become the safety net for long-term care. And so what I think we need to do is look at a long-term care insurance system rather than relying just on Medicaid. Because the Medicaid is it's a safety net, and I believe in supporting it right now until we have a better system that's out there. But we have to look at a better system because right now it doesn't help us in the long run. Then finally, with healthcare, it's just the increase in healthcare costs, the premiums that go up every year. And we've already seen, how yes, the Affordable Care Act reduced the rate of those premiums going up slightly in the past couple of years, but still it's going up at too high of a rate, and it hurts not only middle-class families, but small businesses and employers as well. And one of the ways that we need to work on reducing those year-to-year premium increases is actually by doing the exact type of reforms that I was just talking about, moving towards a system that actually focuses on quality rather than quantity. And if you have specific questions about that, I can get into it. So basically, jobs and healthcare, those are the top two things. Outside of that, it depends on where you are in the district. The Farm Bill is a huge issue in Cattaraugus County, in Steuben County, and the Finger Lakes. I hear about it a lot from people. I was just at the Taste of Tioga, at Tioga County too. I was in the Taste of Tioga event yesterday, which is the Cooperative Extension food program where they bring in restaurants and local farmers to cook food together and show their culinary abilities and the food that they grow. And I was talking to a dairy farmer who had a lot of uncertainty too about what was going to be happening with the Farm Bill due to the loss of the milk income loss contract. And so the Farm Bill is a big issue in those parts of the district.
Yeah, the uncertainty. That's the main thing. Not knowing what programs are going to be continued.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's exactly right. Because what happened is that because the Farm Bill was expires on September 30th, or expired on September 30th, it means that the future of the milk income loss contract is basically not clear. And so our farmers don't have the ability right now to plant. And that's really quite devastating for them. Also, there was a lot of reforms that the Senate bill was proposing in the Farm Bill that actually would, and this is something I was talking to this farmer about yesterday from Candor, is that right now feed costs are through the roof, and that has to do with droughts that have happened across the country. And so feed costs are very high. And the milk income loss contract doesn't do enough to help them with the feed costs, but the Senate's proposal actually has a margin program, a margin insurance program that basically takes into account those increasing feed costs, and which will help out those farmers. So there's a lot of good reforms in that Senate bill, and that Senate bill on the farm side was bipartisan. That's what I don't get. It's a bipartisan bill, right, that Democrats and Republicans support. It actually even not only has these key reforms to help out people like dairy farmers, it also reduces spending from the current Farm Bill, which is good, and that's why a lot of Republicans supported it as well, right? And so it's just surprising to me that the House of Representatives hasn't acted on a Farm Bill. And they're leaving it up to this lame duck session, but every time I hear Congressman Reed talk about these issues, he seems to be wanting it to leave it to this lame duck session. And to me, it's just kicking the can down the road. And you know what? When you kick down the can down the road long enough, eventually the can kicks back. And I think we're going to be seeing that if we don't take action soon.